Hello and welcome to the Cleft Mama podcast. This is a supportive space for families navigating life with a baby diagnosed with a cleft lip and/or palate. Here we share real experiences, practical guidance, and conversations with parents and professionals to help you feel informed, supported, and less alone. I'm your host, Anja Paune, and I'm excited to get started. After a cleft diagnosis, one of the biggest questions is, what should I actually do now? In this episode, I want to talk you through some practical steps you can take so you feel more prepared for what's ahead. Before we begin, I just want to say that different parts of this episode will apply depending when you received your baby's diagnosis. If you found out during pregnancy, for example at your anomaly scan, you may have some time to prepare before your baby arrives. If your baby was diagnosed after birth, your focus might be more on feeding and support in those early days. Some of my recommendations or tips apply to any baby, whether it has a cleft or not, but it still can be very helpful in any case, especially if it is your first baby. So take whatever feels relevant to your situation. One of the most helpful things you can do early on is to focus your attention on a few key areas, rather than trying to cover everything at once. I found it helpful to think in 3 stages: pregnancy, birth, and the early days after birth, and then just focus on what's relevant right now. Let's start with pregnancy. If you're still pregnant, there are a few practical things that can make a real difference. One is harvesting colostrum towards the end of pregnancy. So usually you can start around 36, 37 weeks. There is some research saying that it can induce contractions or start early labor. So you wouldn't really want to start before 36 weeks. But from around 36 weeks, you can start harvesting colostrum. And if you don't quite know how to do it, ask your midwife for some advice or try to find it online. And just collect whatever you can get. Even the smallest few milliliters are really, really helpful. So this can be insanely valuable to have in the early days, especially if feeding is more challenging at the beginning. That is, if the cleft palate is affected as well. The colostrum you just collect in small syringes, 1 ml, 2 ml syringes, and you can freeze that at home. You would want to also label the syringes, and I found out it's not just the bag that they are in, but each individual syringe should also be labeled. And to do this, you want to put a bit of tape on with your name and NHS number. You want to put that on as well. I didn't label the syringes, so in the end, the hospital did it. However, you want to put the sticker on a bit further to the back, so maybe a centimeter or so from the end of the syringe. My hospital put all the tapes on at the very front of the syringe, which meant when I came to feed the baby, I can't actually just put the syringe into the mouth because the sticker was there. So that was really frustrating, having to peel the stickers off for every single syringe before I could feed the baby. So don't make that mistake and put a sticker on towards the end of the syringe. And then you take those frozen syringes with you in the hospital when the time comes. And the next point I have, it's quite a niche point, but if you happen to still be breastfeeding another child, I really would encourage you to not stop because of the cleft diagnosis. And likewise, if you've recently weaned off a toddler that you may have, and they may still be interested in feeding, and you actually feel comfortable with it during pregnancy, you could even see if they would still latch on and start nursing again. And I'm saying this because if you go down the pumping journey later on, having a nursing toddler there is really helpful to keep up the supply or maintain the supply. And I know this will only apply to a small number of people, but at the same time, I didn't want to miss mentioning it. If that's an option for you, it can be a real advantage having that. So just keep going if you're still breastfeeding another child. Another really important step is to get in touch with your cleft team. And in many cases, your cleft nurse will arrange a meeting with you during pregnancy. So normally they are straight in touch with you after you received your diagnosis, and they will come out to meet you. If for some reason this hasn't happened and no one has been in touch with you, it's absolutely okay to ask for a meeting with the Cleft nurse. If you've not been referred to a Cleft team at all, then it's a really good idea to follow up on that. So you either ask your hospital where you received your diagnosis, or you can identify your local Cleft team yourself. So on the NHS website, if you look under cleft lip or cleft palate, they're listing all the Cleft teams and the applicable or the relevant areas that they work in. So you can also get in touch there with them directly and arrange that first meeting. In most cases, though, the Cleft teams are very proactive and supportive, but it's always okay to take that step yourself if it's needed. When you have that first contact with your Cleft nurse, they will likely talk you through the treatment pathway already at that point. They describe what happens after birth, then the different stages and the different surgeries, and what to expect almost over the lifetime of the child. So this is a lot of information all at once. Instead of remembering everything, you may just focus on the questions that are really important right now for you. For example, when will the Cleft team see the baby after the birth? Who do you contact if you have any concerns in the early days? What support is there available around feeding? So having those answers in those early days makes it feel a bit more clear and manageable for you. Another point you might want to think about at this point is to prepare siblings, if there are any. And depending on their age, you really can take it as deep or as lightly as you want to. And here you don't have to be very serious and have a sit down conversation with them, but you can just say, when the baby is there, it might look a little bit different. And we actually found 2 books that were really good in helping those conversations. One is called Kali and Her Cleft, which is provided by Klappa, and they send it out for free. So that's a really good one to go through. And another example is Jack's New Smile. And you can find that on Amazon. And we actually got a copy from the library, which again has been written for siblings to prepare them for a new arrival of a baby with a cleft lip and or palate. And it explains that the baby is not in pain, they are otherwise healthy. And it goes through the surgeries a little bit as well. So this just helps to prepare the siblings of what to expect. And children generally take it much better than adults do. They really just accept it as it is, and they may ask questions what the baby can or can't do. And really, baby can do the same things any other baby can do. It's just that it might not be able to nurse and to breastfeed. When it comes to the birth, it's important to note that a cleft diagnosis on its own should not change how you give birth. So a normal vaginal birth is usually absolutely possible if that is what you were planning or whatever you had in mind. There should be not a reason to change your plan. There's generally no need for induction or additional medical intervention purely because of a cleft, unless there are other factors involved. Once you get a cleft diagnosis, it's classed as an abnormality, and therefore they encourage you or they really book you in for additional growth scans, which you can do, or you could also request more information of why those additional growth scans are needed. But then that sometimes means you're automatically put under consultant-led care, and consultants have a tendency to push induction more than it's needed. So really there, it's important that you feel confident in asking questions, understanding your options, and making decisions that feel right for you. But just a cleft diagnosis alone should not change your birth plan. You can still plan for the kind of birth experience that you wanted. In general preparation for birth, I always recommend to read or listen to positive birth stories, anything that makes you feel calmer or sets you into the right mindset will be helpful here. So if you really want to get into it, I recommend reading Ina May's Guide to Childbirth. And this whole book really has 2 parts of it. The first half is just positive birth stories and explains how long they can sometimes be while still being positive, and also how quickly it can go. And then in the second part, it gives you all the research and details of birth and the type of interventions there may be suggested. When you come into the hospital, I also recommend to tell your midwives of the diagnosis, just so they are prepared, because it's still uncommon. So it's 1 in 700 babies. So the midwives may well not have ever come across a baby with a cleft. So just to prepare them, and they can maybe read up a little bit if there's time, depending on how long your birth takes. But it's just helpful to have them prepared, to not have them surprised when the baby arrives. If your baby only has a cleft diagnosis and no other diagnosis, you can still consider a home birth as well. And I was asked about that, so that was an option given to me. You just need to be aware that once the baby is there, it will very likely need to be seen by the pediatrician just to check that there is nothing else and it's really an isolated cleft lip or cleft palate diagnosis. So this may then speak against the home birth. But in terms of the birth itself, that would also still be an option that should be given to you. Now, one of the biggest areas of concern can often be feeding. So at this stage, it can be helpful to understand what options may be available and what kind of support you'll have. So I'll go into much more detail in later episodes, but in generally, you want to think about, do you want to formula feed? If so, then you prepare to have some formula ready. And that would mean feeding the formula with bottles. There are generally 2 types of bottles that the Cleft teams will recommend for you to use, and they give you 2 before the baby's even born, and then they will assess how the baby is feeding once they visit you after birth, and then you can have more of those bottles that work. They don't want you to stock up on a type of bottle that then doesn't work for the baby. In general, though, there are more than 2 types of bottles that can be used for babies with a cleft lip and a cleft palate. So I will have a future episode specifically on bottles. But first of all, you just want to think, do you want to formula feed or do you want to breastfeed? If your baby only has a cleft lip, then breastfeeding should just work as normal, like for any other baby. However, if it also has a cleft palate, then it won't be able to create a vacuum, so can't nurse by itself. So really, if you were then planning to use breast milk, you have to start pumping. And here, again, I will go into more detail in future episodes, but you want to get a good pump before to have a good supply. You want to have the pump available and ready pretty much as soon as the baby is there, to start pumping as soon as you can, really, to encourage the milk production and to create a good supply. And then you have to get that expressed milk into the baby. And there we again have several options. So you can start by syringe feeding or finger feeding. Then later on, you can also attach the syringe to a tube that then gets attached to your nipple with some tape. And then the baby feeds from the nipple, also its expressed milk through a syringe. Then later on, you can also switch to a supplemental nursing system, or also the Gibellinus method, which is hand expressing into the baby's mouth. And I will discuss it all in more detail in a future episode. For now, just think about whether you want to breastfeed or formula feed. If you need to go down the pumping route, then there are also other moms out there. It is hard work to express for exclusively breastfeeding your baby. But there is support out there, and other moms have gone through it. So prepare yourself, get a support network ready. When it comes to preparing for the baby, less is more. And I can't say that often enough, but it really helps to keep things simple. You only need the basics at the beginning, and most other things can easily be bought later once you know what you actually need. But I think every new parent makes that mistake of preparing a lot of things that they end up not actually using. So again, less is more there. But what you really need in the beginning is just some clothes, some nappies, muslin cloths, a Moses basket or a next to me, so somewhere for the baby to sleep in, and a pram. Then for feeding, just like I said before, you want to have formula if you're using that, or otherwise just have some bottles ready and some syringes and finger feeders, and just something to sterilize them with. And that can also just be a bucket and Milton tablets, for example, depending on what you use, what is the best way to clean it. But again, don't overcomplicate it. If you plan to have a baby shower, a quite nice idea I've heard is instead of giving a lot of baby items and doing some baby-related activities, you may also consider preparing some meals together. So just you have a stock in your freezer for when you first get home and you're figuring out how to look after this baby and how to feed it. You don't have to then think about how you feed yourself. You have already your favorite meals prepared, ready in the freezer. Another idea someone else shared is instead of getting a lot of cards of people who are wishing you well for the baby, they could also get just some little kids' books or baby books and write into the first page there. So that way you build up a nice little library of children's book and they all have the inscription with the well wishes in them. In general, one of the most useful things you can do is to make sure you have support in place. That might be your partner, family, friends, or other parents in similar situations. Support groups can be incredibly helpful, not just for information, but for reassurance and shared experiences. So that knowing that there are people who understand what you're going through can make a huge difference. And I said it before and I say it again, this is really where the Facebook group from Clapper came in incredibly valuable for me. I've been in a lot of Facebook groups in the past. So I joined other groups on breastfeeding or elimination communication, but I've never found such an encouraging group. They're all so lovely and really supportive and helpful. So I really recommend, if you're on Facebook, look out for the Clapper Facebook group there. Another great idea that I heard is to find out beforehand who is actually willing to help and support you. And I'm sure there are quite a lot of people, but those ones in your area that can actually help on a day-to-day basis, get them all in one WhatsApp group. Call them your support network, your support group, whatever you want to call them. But when the time actually comes that you need some help, you just message in that group. So you say, can someone please get us some nappies, for example? And then have them answer within that group. And that really helps you not having to coordinate between all the different people. There may be a lot of people otherwise messaging you, how can we help? And then you have to remember who you've asked what for. And likewise, if they see that it's always the same one responding, then they might say, next time, can we just pick up a task or let us know what can happen? And we are the ones who do it next time. So you may just want to have one group and say, can someone drop off dinner? Can someone help with cleaning the house or sorting through the laundry once? Can someone play with the older children and take them out to the park? And yeah, just having it all in one place just really gets the mental load off from you and you can just focus on your new baby. So these are just a few simple steps that can help you feel more prepared going into birth and the very early days with your baby. You can find the links to everything that I mentioned in the show notes. I hope that was useful and I see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Cleft Mama podcast. I hope you get a ton of value out of our time together. You're not alone in this journey. And remember, you're doing an amazing job. If this episode helped you, please follow and share it with another parent who might benefit from it. See you next time.